This podcast is brought to you by the Prospect Research Institute, where researchers come to learn, innovate, and connect.
Before, we used to raise money from friends, and today we raise money from strangers and then try to turn them into friends. And it's much harder. It's much, much more expensive. And we lose a lot of people along the way.
Welcome to Prospect Research Chat Bites, a podcast by and for prospect research professionals. I'm Jennifer Filla. Today, I'm talking with Penelope Burk, president at Cygnus Applied Research, Inc. Hello, Penelope. Thank you for joining me today on Chat Bites.
Hi, Jennifer. How are you?
Wonderful. I'm thrilled to have you here today. I heard you speak a number of years ago, and I knew I wanted to talk to you at some point in the future, and I'm very thankful that you're able to join us today.
Oh, that's great. I'm really glad to do it, especially given what your podcast is, who it's for, and what it's all about, because prospect research is a big deal.
Before we jump into the topic of donor-centered fundraising research, I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share a little bit about your career and what you're doing right now.
Well, how I got into fundraising quite a long time ago by accident, and a lot of people who are, in my era, my age, got into fundraising the same way. As a matter of fact, we've done quite a bit of research with professional fundraisers, including how they started in the business or whether they transitioned in from something else. Anyway, I took a job that was in my field at the time, marketing and communications, and it turned out to be about 95% fundraising. So that's how I started in fundraising. That particular organization raised all its money through fundraising events, if you can believe it. And I learned the hard way about running events, the high risk of weather-dependent events and all kinds of things. And then from there, I gradually learned more and more about fundraising in its truly diversified state, worked for other organizations, became an executive director, and eventually, after leading a fundraising effort for a national organization, sort of went out on my own with my kind of small firm called at the time Burk and Associates Limited. So there was Burk, but there were no associates. But I did have 3 small kids, and I was running this one-person consulting firm out of my dining room. And in my, quote, spare time, if there's any such thing for a mother, I don't think there is, but in my off time, when I wasn't developing fundraising strategic plans for my clients, I became interested in the subject of donor recognition. And I have a background in market research as well as a fundraising background. And I started to do research first with professional fundraisers and then with donors on their issues and preferences and questions on the subject of donor recognition. And eventually, especially through the research I did with donors, it led me to this concept called donor-centered fundraising. So that's my background.
That's great. I do remember when I first came across your name, you were speaking somewhere, I was looking you up, and it said you were into donor research. And I thought, oh, she does what I do. But you don't quite do what I do. It's not the same kind of prospect research in support of the fundraising effort. So how's that different, and what kind of interactions have you had maybe with people like me in prospect research?
So, no, it's not the same. Prospect research and the research I do are different. Like, you do research on donors, and I do research with donors.
Yes.
I think on fundraising. So you can see why they would be compatible. So the essence of my work is that I talk to donors through our research studies about how they're managing their philanthropy and what they're looking for from the not-for-profit organizations that they support. Why they might start giving to an organization, what causes them to stay loyal to certain organizations while dropping others, what inspires them to make more generous gifts over time to certain organizations, what they feel is problematic about fundraising methodology that they feel contributes to them not wanting to give again, or, disappearing from one cause and going over to another, that kind of thing. And because I've been doing this research since the late 90s, and we do an annual research study called the Burk Donor Survey, which engages thousands of donors. So that we've got the 2019 version that just closed, and there are about 12,000 donors who participated in that study. And we ask two streams of questions every year that are identical. How you gave last year, how that compares with the year before, and your plans for giving going forward over the next 12 months. And are they up, down, or the same as before? And how you manage your philanthropy today compared with 5 or 10 years ago, and what you're trying to accomplish as a donor. So that's kind of the big picture. And we ask these series of questions in every research study we conduct. So we have this beautiful trend line on donor opinion and behavior. And there are, donors behave quite differently today when they consider their philanthropy and as they manage their giving from how they behaved 10 years ago, and certainly from how they behaved 20 years ago. So we have strong, very strong evidence that giving is not a monolithic experience, that it's static. It changes. And that in itself is justification for fundraising not remaining the same year after year, but adapting to meet donors' changing needs, but also just changing environmental issues like the massive changes there have been in communications technology in the last 20 years, for example. I'll give you one example of a long-term change that is related to donor recognition, where my research began. So when we first started talking to donors about the role that having their name published in an annual report or a newsletter, for example, how that related to their desire to give to an organization or stay loyal or give more generously than they have given before, about 65 to 70% of donors at that time, when we first started asking the question, said that it wasn't really relevant, that they were looking for things that weren't part of this kind of recognition, that they were looking for something else that would keep them in place more effectively, and that having name recognition wasn't especially an effective tool in sustaining their loyalty. But in the most recent study where we revisited this issue of name recognition, the percentage has gone up to 92% of donors who now say that that kind of recognition does not keep them giving to an organization, does not inspire them to give more generously. So while it was fairly strong to begin with, it's really high now. And it automatically sort of, if I circle back and relate that to the fact that donors are handling their giving differently, they have priorities as far as what they feel they need from not-for-profits. And certain things they're not particularly interested in, and they don't think they're effective. Meanwhile, recognizing donors' names or publishing donors' names is still a core activity in fundraising, while donors' opinions of the importance of that activity has changed dramatically over time.
That's a great example. And it's one of the reasons why I like your research so much as a prospect researcher, because what I do, especially as a consultant, is often focused on campaigns. So supporting a campaign.
Yeah.
And one of the ways which we can really add value, especially as machine learning is really doing the patterning and the grunt work, is when we can say, hey, here's this research, primary research that shows these are the typical motivations or things they want or don't want. And then here's what I see about this particular prospect on paper. It gives them a leg up on really getting a strong cultivation strategy in place.
Yeah, it can be really valuable. So as far as like, now I'm going to ask you a question.
Sure.
And that is, of all the information that you might gather on a prospect, what do you feel is the most valuable?
It really depends. There's this balance between philanthropy and wealth. So
Hmm.
we do need to have people capable of giving a gift that can transform an organization when that's what they're doing. But at the
Hmm.
same time, understanding how they want to give based on what we see is important. Many prospects will tell the world, I want to give this way. Sometimes they're interviewed, sometimes it's a video or
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
transcript or a magazine article, and paying attention to that, pulling that out and saying, look, they've told us these things, or they've told the public these things about their philanthropy. We look at patterns in giving. Is the woman recognized individually in her gifts, separate from her husband? That's
Hmm.
important to know.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
I think it's important for us to look at the pieces of philanthropy and wealth together when we do
Hmm.
research. Does that
Hmm.
surprise you?
No, I find it interesting because prospect research is important and it can be really valuable. But I also think sometimes it goes too far. The end result is it can mute the excitement about discovering something about a human being in an interview that a gifts officer might have with a prospect. So I guess what I'm saying is if you can go in with too much information and it prevents you from having a natural conversation where one discussion point or comment would naturally lead to a question about why do you think that way. But if you go in having the answer to too many questions, it can be counterproductive in some ways.
Very true. Very true. And that's why I wanted to ask you a question about new development officers, because we need to have some curiosity, and a researcher's time doing manual research is expensive. And when we have first
Yes.
identified somebody, usually a donor, so they have a history of giving with an organization, sometimes the new development officers are hesitant to go out and make that first phone call and visit without a ton of information. And I'm wondering, from your viewpoint, as you've interviewed donors for recognition, but also you've had a lot of interactions face to face with donors in a
Hmm.
non-solicitation way.
That's right.
Yep.
It's a huge advantage, I have to say, too, because they know I'm never going to ask them for money.
Right, right. And so
Yeah.
how would you tell a development officer, no, you really don't need a full dossier on your prospect before you make that first phone call or two
You
phone calls?
know, it makes me wonder whether new people to relationship fundraising. So let's say you're talking about someone who's landed their first job as a gifts officer, let's say,
Mhm.
and they're looking for all the help and ammunition and crutches. And I don't say that in a critical way. I mean, who wouldn't when they've never done it before, that they can avail themselves of so that they can do the best possible job. And it maybe lessens the fear factor in heading out there and building a relationship with a donor. So I see the sheer value in that. But then I'd have to say, I wonder if managers are putting new gifts officers in those critical situations too soon without the benefit of a lot of situational learning through, let's say, role playing, where in a safe environment, they can have pretend meetings with donors where certain situations arise in the meeting, and they learn how to handle them before they're in front of a real donor, where there's so much on the line in those discussions.
Sure. And I like the way you phrased it before too, that too much information takes out that spark of excitement, that
Yeah.
curiosity about another individual.
And it would raise suspicion in donors. Like if you know too much about someone, then the donor would quite rightly start to wonder where you acquired this information. I can't see how that would make a donor feel comfortable. for me, if I was a gifts officer and had the benefit of prospect research staff in my department, the thing that I would want from them more than anything else, and as a matter of fact, I guess if I could only have one thing, the one thing I would want is information that prevents me from putting my foot in my mouth.
Yes.
Because I think that is the critical information. For instance, if my prospective donor were Jewish, I don't want to be calling that person up for an appointment on a Jewish holiday. To me, that's the killer information. That's what I want to know. I want my colleague, my prospect research officer, to help me not make a dreadful error. I'd want to know something like, if I'm going to see a donor who's a widower and his wife just died 30 days before, I need to have that information going in. Now, the fact that he's willing to entertain a meeting with me may be related to that, but I don't want to knock on his door and walk into his living room without knowing that his wife just died. So for me, it's not about who else they've given to, at what gift value. It isn't about that. It's about the things that really matter in that individual's life, because it's not about the money.
Right.
The money is the end product. And yet most of our research is focused on how much money they're giving, who they gave it to. In our annual editions of the Burk Donor Survey, we ask 100 and some odd questions. But among those questions, we ask, how much money did you give in total last year to all the causes you supported? What was the value of your single largest gift to someone and your single smallest gift to someone? Now, we don't ask who they offered those gifts to, because frankly, I don't care. We do ask what types of not-for-profits they support, but we're not expecting them to disclose which organization got how much money. It's not necessary in the research we do. But if I then take the donors in our survey who, let's say, gave over $100,000 to not-for-profit causes in the previous year, and who said that the single largest gift they gave to someone was at least $25,000. Like, it could be a lot more, but it was at least $25,000. Then I take that group of donors and I run a report on what they said their smallest gift was in the same year to someone. And in last year's survey, 81% of those donors who were giving the most money and who made at least one gift, $25,000 or more, 81% also made at least one gift of $100 or less to someone. So there aren't major donors, and while we never use this term, if we're talking about donors in terms of major donors, then there are minor donors, but there aren't that thing that seems to distinguish one group from another group of donors. They're all the same people. And any organization that is enjoying a relationship with a donor whom they term a major donor and is the very lucky recipient of generous gifts, down the road, that same human being is giving what any fundraiser would call a minor or inconsequential gift to someone else and is being treated completely differently. Same human being. And it's because we focus too much of our attention on the money, and then we actually push that onto the prospect researchers as well. So we ask them to focus too much of their attention on the money instead of the information that would be much, much more valuable in building a relationship. Well, you know what the best prospect research of all is?
Tell me.
I have long advocated calling new donors to say thank you as soon as you receive their first gift. Now, 70% of first-time donors who will give you a gift that they say is not at all generous within their own means. They're purposefully giving just a little bit of money when they make a gift for the first time. partly because most of them are giving through a direct marketing appeal, but also because they don't know you yet. So they'll give you a little bit of money. They'll see what you come back with. If they like what they see, then they're ready to put their gift values where they actually belong. But fundraisers don't know that because all they see is the gift. A new donor has come in. This is the gift amount. It's only $50. A $50 gift doesn't warrant any good things in return. So we'll just hammer them with more appeals. But if you phone the first-time donor after they make a gift just to say thank you, and I wanted to call you myself just to say how very much we appreciate you choosing our organization out of the 1.2 million possibilities there were at that moment in time, right? You don't have to say that, but and it's even more effective if a board member makes that call, or the CEO, someone who donors say has extraordinary influence. Now, what will happen is that most donors, surprised to get the call, will just sort of not quite know what to say, and there'll be a pause, and then they'll go, well, that's very kind of you. Thank you for calling. But you can see it play out in their greater likelihood that they'll give again. But some donors, and of course this is important because the level of donor attrition between gift number 1 and ask number 2 is 65%. It's at a crisis level. Thanking a new donor, just not because they gave you a lot of money, because they will not have given you a lot of money, but just because they're on board, is a very smart tactic. It doesn't cost anything. And among some donors will say in that phone call, well, thank you for calling, and let me tell you why I decided to give to you for the first time. And out will come the information that is the most valuable information a prospect researcher could ever gather on those donors. The answer to the question, why, out of all the choices out there, did you choose my organization to start supporting? It's a small number, but some donors will also say, let me tell you why I gave. And by the way, while I've got you on the phone, I see I got this appeal, which is what I responded to, and it suggested I should give 50, 100, or 200 or other. So I sent you a check for $200, but I could give you 50,000.
Wow. Really? You've
and
heard
it
of...
happens.
Oh my goodness.
I've done it. I've done the research. We've tested this. It happens. And so you take a brand new donor who gave you $50, who by the end of the phone call, because you're not asking for money, you're just saying thank you, and the donor's doing the talking, and you can say, let me have my CEO call you in the morning.
Wow, that's powerful.
Yes, and they jump from an introductory level, throwaway gift, to a significant gift because they know they have landed in the right place. Before, we used to raise money from friends, and today we raise money from strangers and then try to turn them into friends. And it's much harder. It's much, much more expensive. And we lose a lot of people along the way.
Thank you so much for sharing with us today, Penelope. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks for being interested.
That was Penelope Burk, president at Cygnus Applied Research, Inc. As you discovered, she applies a different kind of donor research. She talks directly to donors about their giving. Although Penelope frequently speaks to audiences of all frontline fundraisers, I get excited about how the data in her report can feed prospect research professionals. As machine learning takes over more and more of the hunting and gathering work we do, we can focus on what motivates donors and how they want to be cultivated. Penelope's report gives us the data to support our insights and recommendations. Understanding fundraising is key to being a great prospect researcher. That's why all of the courses at the Institute weave in knowledge and theory about fundraising with the how-to of research. If you haven't visited the Prospect Research Institute, go on, check out our offerings at www.prospectresearchinstitute.org. I look forward to seeing you there.